The night had settled over the red keep like a damp cloak, heavy with heat and the stagnant smells of a city that had eaten and drunk and sweated all day. From the Tower of the Hand, the torchlit lanes of Maegor's Holdfast cut dark angles toward the curtain walls, and beyond those walls the black band of the Blackwater Bay showed a few wavering lanterns like foxfire on a midnight fun. In his chamber, Ned Stark sat with a great leather-bound book open upon the table in front of him. His left leg stretched stiff and aching under the table, the cane laid close enough for his hand to find without looking. He read again by candlelight the patient columns, names upon names, fathers and sons through the long thread of Baratheon blood, an accounting as dry as salt, and he whispered the words soundlessly, tasting the shape of them in his mouth as if they might prove false if he did not speak them right. Black of hair, he thought, not reading now but remembering, and every lord of Storm's End so described. Stormlords born from Durrandon kings and finally from Orys Baratheon. All dark as ravens whether their mothers were pale as milkmaids or golden as autumn wheat. Unbroken, the blood ran a bold ink line all the way to Lord Steffan's sons. Steffan and then Robert and Stannis and Renly. Dark heads and fierce tempers and children of the same stamp when there were children at all. He turned a page with rough fingers and the vellum whispered like a dying thing. The candle flame bent in a draught from the shutters, and the room seemed suddenly to tilt, not with the wine he had not drunk but with the conclusion the book pressed like a slow knife against the hollow under his breastbone. Jon Arryn had known. The old man had seen what he had seen and paid for it with his life. He thought of Jon's lips moving to shape a warning on the bed in the Eyrie. Too late. He thought of the boy with the helm of bull's horns, working in the heat and noise of Tobo Mott's forge, eyes blue as a cold northern sky and a spill of black hair clinging to his brow, and of the girl who bounced a laughing babe with a fuzz of the same dark on its tender scalp, and of Maya Stone perched above the mules on the perilous track to the Eyrie, black-haired too, sure-footed as the animals she led. Then he thought of Joffrey's smooth lion's mane, the shining silk of Myrcella's pale gold, the soft wheat of Tommen's crown. Lannister, all three. The pattern was a cudgel, obvious once seen, and he wanted not to see it even as the truth stood in front of him and would not move. Under his hand the book trembled. He stilled it. A Northman, even in the south, had no business with trembling. He closed the book with a sound that was almost gentle for all that he wanted to fling it through the shutters into the dark and let the sea swallow it. The great clasp fell into place and he fastened it without looking. When he stood, his leg reminded him of steel and bone and the foolishness of charging Lannister men for the sake of a fool's pride in the street. Jory's laughing eyes flashed up from a memory so sharp it cut, and he tasted iron in the back of his throat. "Hallis," he said, and the door, which he had not thought to lock, swung wider to show Hallis Mullen already there in the outer chamber, heavy-shouldered and thick with worry. "My lord," Hallis said. He did not ask why Ned's voice had that burr of winter in it, why his face had thinned. The men who had come south with him from Winterfell had learned how to read his silences, and there had been too many of them these last days. Tommard's outside with two more. The city stinks of Lannisters tonight. "The city stinks of itself," Ned said, but the corner of his mouth twitched with something not quite a smile. "I need a lantern, too. No banners." Hallis looked at the shuttered windows and then back at Ned with a small frown. "At this hour? At this hour?" He reached for his cane. "We go to the king now." Mullen hesitated, the frown deepening into a groove. "It is late, my lord. The king." "Robert is awake," Ned said. "He will be awake if he is drunk, and if he is not drunk he will be angry to be woken. I prefer his anger to waiting." Alice did not argue again. He moved to the door and spoke his men's names softly, like a prayer for the road. Fat Tom appeared as if he had been pressed from the wall itself, as pale as cheese and twice as broad, and another guardsman whose mouth Ned could not put to a name just then. Ned took up his cloak, though the night was hot enough to soak a man with his own sweat, and let the heavy wool settle on his shoulders like a burden older than he was. The corridors of the Tower of the Hand were half-lit and slept in by torchlight. The rushes on the floor crackled underfoot like thin ice. They passed a somnolent serving boy curled against a wall with a broom under his arm, as if he had slid down in the act of sweeping and forgotten to stand again. A spider scuttled along the base of the wainscoting and Tomard ground it under his boot. Ned heard that small crunch and remembered another, bone under steel under the hooves of men who should have been his men, and he tightened his grip on the cane until his old fingers burned. The keep at night was a different creature than the keep by day. By day it strutted and preened, red stone blazing, bells tolling, courtiers flitting like bright birds from one appointment to another, the stables clattering, the kitchen steaming, all of it a body in motion with some hidden heartbeat. By night the body lay in shadow and the heartbeat was gone. Yet something else moved through it, little gusts of laughter from behind shutters, the soft feet of conspiracies, breath through a keyhole, a sigh inside a bed curtain. Ned felt it like a cold along his spine. So long in the south and he still could not love this place. He longed suddenly, fiercely, for the gods wood at Winterfell, the smell of damp earth and old leaves, the dark of the pines and the red eyes of the heart tree watching him without judgment or mercy. There was a gods wood here in the Red Keep, but it was a southern thing of oaks and elms and tame pools that reflected the moon like a mirror, and its gods were strangers to him. They crossed into Maegor's Holdfast by a narrow bridge with murder holes above that drank their torchlight and gave nothing back. The sentries knew Ned and let them pass with the bored obedience of men who had been standing too long at their ease. In the inner ward the flagstones still held the day's heat, surprising through the soles of a boot and the layers of a man's stubbornness. Ned paused a moment, breathing, and then he went on to the king's door. Two of the king's guards stood there in white cloaks that looked gray without the sun, helms under arms, hair slicked to their temples with sweat. Ser Meryn Trant's eyes were a muddy brown behind the laces of his visor. The other was Ser Boros Blunt, cheeks like curds and a faint sheen of wine on his breath that made the air around him sweet. Meryn shifted his weight to his other foot and lifted his chin. "Lord Stark," Meryn said, making the title sound like something that had to be swallowed. "I will see the king," Ned said. "At this hour?" Boros asked, in the same half-wine Hallis had stifled. "At this hour," Ned repeated and did not look away. Meryn Trant and Ser Boros glanced at one another, calculating who would bear blame if they denied him and who would bear anger if they admitted him. In the end, no one wished to stand between the hand and the king when the hand looked as if winter had entered him. Meryn pushed open one of the doors and stood aside. A steward within put a finger to his lips by habit, and then looked at Ned's face and lost the habit with a swallow. Ned crossed the threshold. Robert's solar smelled of wine and sweat and stale rushes, and a little of the oil that was used to keep the rust from the great antlered warhammer that lay on a trestle table like a sleeping dog. Two candles guttered in their sconces by the window, the shutters thrown open to any breeze that might remember the river. Robert himself had slumped in a chair in his shirt sleeves, his belly making his belt a suggestion rather than a fact. A cup dangled from his fist as if he had fallen asleep while refusing to let go. He was not asleep. His eyes were open, shadowed, and he lifted them to Ned as a tired man will lift them to a friend who brings more weight than rest. "If you've come to scold, I'll throw you out the window," Robert said, but there was no heat in it, only the grind of a man whose armor had long ago been taken off and not put back on again. Ned did not waste time on courtesy that would have been a delay and an insult both. He set the leather-bound book on the table with both hands and drew it toward the candlelight so the king could see the thick script and the initial letters drawn like thorns. "This," he said, and found his mouth dry. He swallowed. "This is the book Lord John died for." Robert made a lazy paw at the thing and then stopped, sober enough to recognize the name John Arryn as something to draw a man upright. He set his cup down with a carefulness that would have been comical in other men and pushed himself to his feet. "You look as though your leg has broken again," he said, peering. "What in the hells is it?" "Lineages," Ned said. "Lord Stefan and his back to Orys. And forward." He opened where his this night path had left a crease under his thumb. "Your children are not yours, Robert." Robert stood very still. The cicadas beyond the shutter were loud. The city breathed through 1,000 small breaths. Somewhere someone laughed too loudly and hushed themselves quick. Robert stared at the page until it meant nothing. Then he lifted that heavy face of his, bearded and red and rumpled with sleep and drink. What? Ned did not repeat it with different words. Repetition would make it a jest. He placed his hand flat on the page as if to keep the king's gaze from slipping off it. All your bastards black of hair. The kings before you black of hair. Your brothers black of hair. 1,000 seeds, 1 harvest. And your lawful children golden. All 3. He let the silence fill again. A bowl with too much weight in it that would break if any more were poured in. Robert's mouth opened, closed, opened like a man suddenly short of breath. He began and stopped. He did not say the Queen's name, and that told Ned as much as the catch in his throat. He had loved Cersei with the love he gave to armor and to horses and to the wind when it was at his back. Love worn like a thing that made men look and cheer. Hate came easier and habit easier still. He had not loved Cersei, but he had worn the marriage like a shield all the same, and Ned had never cared for that shield very much. Now the shield had betrayed him. Robert's hand went out and closed around the empty cup and squeezed until Ned thought it would shatter. "Jaime," Robert said. He did not cry it or spit it. He said it like he was naming a piece of meat and asking for the carving knife. Ned let out a breath he had not meant to hold. "Jaime," he said, and it was relief and sorrow together, for the truth had been moving from shape to shape in his mind, some of them darker and more cruel than others, and for all that this was bitter, it was a bitterness he could fit in his mouth. Robert moved. He crossed the room to the table where the hammer lay and put his hand on the cool iron and did not lift it. "Jaime ran," he said, the words rasped thin. "Took horse with a company when I told him not to shed any more blood, and he ran. He knew that, of course. She," again his mouth balked, "she let me bed her in the same palace where—" He became aware then of the presence of other ears and turned his head toward the steward with a look that would have blistered bark. "Out," he said, when the lad had gone so quickly he knurled. Why left his shoes? Robert put both his hands on the hammer and looked at Ned over it. "Tell me everything." Ned told him. He set forth the book's cold litany, and he told of Jon Arryn's last days, and of the visit to Tobo Mott, and of the boy there, and of the girl at the riverside, and he told him what he had been told of the children born to Lannister women and to Riverland girls, and he told him of the quiet assertion in a ledger that had killed a hand and would have him too if he did not move now. He told him that a king's children should look like a king's, and these did not. He told him the queen had lain with her brother, not as rumor but as fact implied by every cold column and by the faces of living bastards who bore the truth on their scalps. He did not tell him that he had gone to Cersei to warn her, because he had not yet. Tonight he had come straight here. Robert listened, and as he listened the red left his face until it seemed thinner and older than Ned had ever seen it. He looked suddenly like a man who had ridden without stopping and could not stop even now because the thing behind him would catch him if he did. "It's a book," he said at last, almost pleading. "Ned, it's a book. Pycelle will have a book to say the opposite if I hold out my hand." Ned put 2 fingers on the page, then lifted them to touch his own hair, which had gone iron gray from black. He did not think that would persuade a man who had always rather be led by a battle cry than by a proof. So he said something harder. "Go find your bastards," he said. "Look at them. Remember their mothers. And then look at Joffrey. Look at the girl. Look at the boy." Robert's mouth twisted and then set. He made a small sound deep in his chest that might have been laughter and might have been the opposite. "I have seen them," he said. "I always thought—" He shook his head once, a violent denial of his own foolishness. "I thought the gods had played a jest. That Lannister gold was stronger than Stormland iron. Gods." He went to the window and looked out over the dark, as if expecting the answer to be written on the black waters. When he turned, his eyes had gone cold in a way that frightened Ned more than the red flush had. "Where is Stannis?" "On Dragonstone," Ned said. "He left when he began to suspect. He will come if called." "If called?" Robert echoed flatly. He made a face that showed too much of the boy he had been. "He'll come like a lawyer with his parchment in his hand. He'll count the chairs in the room and make sure he's sitting in the best one before he opens his mouth." "7 hells, Ned. I should have—" I should have seen." He rubbed a hand over his face as if wiping away the last years and finding underneath a man who had not been king. "We move now," he said. "Not tomorrow. Not after this bloody boar hunt. Now, before her father's gold finds more ears." He stabbed a finger at the hammer and then at the door. "Find me Selmy. Find me Renly. And you stay with me." "I am here," Ned said. Robert's decision, when it came, had the same blunt weight his hammer had. He was not a subtle man. He saw a thing and then he broke it or took it and might regret it or not later. Ned's fears in the days since Jon Arryn's death had been fears shaped like inaction, like delay, like poison seeping under doors while men made fine speeches. The relief was like air after being underwater too long. It did not keep his bones from aching or his heart from hurting, and it did not quiet the cold whisper under all his thoughts that said Cersei had lived her life here in the same castle as he had and had not gone unarmed. Robert moved to the door and called in a voice that made the timber jump in its frame. One of the king's guards startled, nearly dropping his helm in his hurry to present his body for use. "Selmy, now," the king said, "and wake my brother, the master of laws." He added with a twist of the mouth that was not quite a smile. "Your grace," said Meryn Trant, and went like a man gladly given a task that might save him from standing still. When they were alone again, Robert dragged a chair to the table and sat heavily. He looked at the leather belly of the book as if it were a beast he might have to stab. "If this is true," he said, speaking into the stillness so that the dark seemed to lean toward him to listen, "then Joffrey is not mine, nor the girl, nor the little one. They are hers." He looked up and the look in his eyes was hollow and fierce all at once. "I'd not harm children," he said, a challenge in it, as if daring Ned to say otherwise. Ned felt, sudden as cold water, the memory of the small council table not a fortnight past, where the very same man had spoken of a girl across the world he had never seen with a foreign name and had wanted her dead because she was an idea in a prophecy. He held the thought and did not throw it. He was not here to win an argument every which way. "They are blameless," he said, "and Myrcella and Tommen are very young." Robert closed his eyes a moment. "The boy," he said, and there was in the word both longing for something he had never had and revulsion at the thing that had pretended to be it. "We'll put them under guard," he said. "The queen in her rooms, the children under guard," he repeated, as if trying to fit that idea in his mouth. "We will send for Stannis. He is the next rightful heir if all this has the strength it seems to have." The sentence finished itself inside both of them. "We'll call a council, not the lot of them," he added, as if aware at last of how many snakes had found a place in the palace. "Varys, yes, no. I'll hear him, but I'll not take his whisper for truth. Baelish, gods, I'd rather not. Pycelle will piss his robes." He looked aside at Ned. "You will stand by me, even when it's ugly. This will be ugly." "It is already ugly," Ned said, and for the first time that night the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I will stand by you. Bar." Iston Selmy came as if he had been waiting on the other side of the door for just this summons. His white cloak gathered up over one elbow to keep it clean from the floors and his face carved into the same formidably courteous lines it had worn since before Ned had been born. He went to one knee and bowed his head as if there were sunlight on them and not candles guttering. "Your Grace," he said. "Sire," Robert said, and those two syllables had in them a weight of respect that Robert did not give often. "Rise. I have need of you tonight, of your arm and of your name." Barristan rose, standing as straight as a stave. His hair had gone fine and silver, but his eyes were not yet old. He took in Ned, the book, the king's face, and said nothing of what he saw there. He had served men who had done worse and said less. Robert told him. The words were passable now, and Robert had always preferred to butt a thing with his head than to creep up on it. When he reached Jaime's name, he said it the way he had the first time, not spitting. Barristan's expression changed as little as the figurehead of a ship changes in a storm, yet Ned thought his knuckles whitened under the neatly washed fingers. "If this is so," Barristan said when Robert had finished, "then the law is the law." "The law," Robert said, and it sounded odd in his mouth, like the name of an old friend he had not spoken in years. We put the queen under guard. We put the children under guard. We call a council at dawn. We send a raven to Dragonstone. And if Cersei tries to flee, you will stop her. She will not try to flee, Barristan said mildly, which made Robert snort as if a dog had barked in a chapel. You have not had the pleasure of her company these dozen years as I have. Robert looked down at his hammer and then up again. And if she resists, she will not, Barristan repeated. But there was something in the way his hand closed over the pommel of his sword that allowed for a world in which she did. Renly came in as the orders were being pared and sharpened. He was not winded, but his hair was disordered as if he had run a hand through it a few times on the way to make it sit right and then thought better of it. He wore a green velvet doublet with golden stags running, and his smile was set, a shield of its own. Brother, he said, if this is about the hunt, you need not send for me in the middle of the night to tell me we ride at dawn. We do not ride, Robert said. We finish something that should have been finished long ago. He sketched the truth in blunt lines that made Renly's eyes widen and then narrow, quick as the flick of a blade. I told Ned a week ago we should have seized them, Renly said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction that he had been proved right and not insisting the night include the fact that Ned had refused. Not like this, he added, half an afterthought. Then his jaw set. But now, yes, Mandon Moore can take the queen with me. Marin Trant and Boros can each take a child under guard. We should keep them separate from each other. The girl runs to the septa if she runs anywhere. The boy to the kitchens. Renly mused, and a brief disbelief crossed his face at the idea of Tommen running anywhere at all. The elder boy, Joffrey, Robert said, tasting the name, will strut and shout. Renly finished just as dryly. He looked at Ned, and something sharp and almost fond was in the look. Do not glare at me, Stark. If you had taken my counsel then, this would be done already. If I had taken your counsel then, Ned said, we would be awash in blood and the city would be burning around our ears. It may yet, Renly replied, and his smile went thin. Better we make it burn on our terms. Ned opened his mouth and closed it, seeing the sense in Renly's readiness even as his northern blood recoiled at the speed of it. There was an argument to be made about honor carrying weight only when a man's choices had time to ripen. Tonight they did not. Barristan's presence rooted the thing in law, and Renly's in swiftness, and Robert's in brute will. Ned felt perversely calmer for the triangle of it. Varys, Robert said abruptly, as if remembering a thing one does not wish to remember, we will have to wake the spider. If I move in my own palace, he will hear me whatever I wish. Better I send for him and make him speak at my table. Peter too, if only so he does not trip over us by accident and think he has discovered us, Renly added. Wake them, Robert ordered. And Pycelle, gods spare me his quavering. Barristan gave a small bow and was gone, white cloak ghosting into the draft. Renly sent a page. Ned sat again because his leg had begun to prick pins into his thigh, and he let his hands rest on the table without touching the book, as if the thing were contagious and he had already had his dose. When Varys glided in, he had the look of a man who had been awake all since morning in any case. He seemed always to have a fond candle of his own rising behind his bald head, a glow of very careful concern. Your Grace, he breathed. What unexpected joy to be summoned at this hour by one so strong and virtuous. How may your servant ease your burdens? Robert gazed at him for a long moment as if calculating exactly where to hit him so that the skull would crack in a satisfying way. Sit, he said finally. Listen. Varys listened. Of course he listened. He folded his soft hands upon the better knee of his silk breeches and set his face in a shape that held a decent amount of surprise and an equal measure of dismay. Oh, he said when listening had finished. This is grave, more grave than I had feared. You feared something like it? Robert demanded, and the anger that ran like wire through his voice sang a little. I fear everything, Your Grace, Varys said with his small apologetic tilt of the head. It is my profession, but yes. Since Lord Stannis departed without farewell, I have imagined a number of unhappy possibilities, including this one. One cannot mistake strong lines when one knows how to read them, and there are always murmurs. He folded and unfolded his fingers. It is fortunate that you are swift, your grace. Swift and bold. Robert snorted at that, but let the flattery cling. Do the Lannisters know we know? They will know soon if they do not already, Varys said. The queen is not asleep, and her women have quick feet. Pycelle will be awake by now, and she will have him at her bedside within the hour. The Red Keep is a sieve, your grace, and I would not trust it to carry water. We put them under guard now, Robert said, as if saying it again settled it in the mortar of the world. Barristan will take men. Renly will take men. Ned will stand with me. We call the council at dawn. We send a raven. Varys's smile did not widen and did not waver. As your grace commands, I would add a quiet word to the commander of the city watch, if I may be so bold. Janos Slint, Robert asked as if he were recalling the name of a dog that had not bitten him often enough to be clear in his mind. Speak your word, then, but I trust him as far as I can throw the tower of the hand. Trust is a luxury, Varys murmured, but gold is practical. Lord Peter holds the purse, and the watch answers quickest to coin. If your grace intends to move through the keep, it will be wise to keep the watch in the streets calm. We do not wish a riot if rumors run. As if conjured by the mention of coin, Peter Baelish slipped in with a smile on his narrow face that said he had been born in this room and had been waiting for them all to arrive. You call, I run, he said. Forgive me if I forget my slippers next time and add my blood to the rushes. He gave Ned a small, almost sorrowful shrug. Lord Stark, always a pleasure even when the hour is inconvenient. We are not here for your pleasure, Robert said. You are here because your hands are on the purse and the city watchman's balls are in it. The queen has betrayed me, not with a potboy, with her brother. The children are not mine. Peter's face did an interesting thing then which Ned could not have described later if pressed at spear point. It moved through several expressions too fast to hold any single one. So you finally read the book, he said lightly at last. I do hope you didn't spill wine on it. It is expensive. He held up a hand when Robert's eyes narrowed to points of light. Your grace, I say nothing that undermines your wrath. I agree with it. You want me to speak to Slint. Good. I can do that. Do it, Robert snapped. Tell him what? Tell him that if his men lift a finger for a red cloak instead of for me, I'll flay him and send his skin to his wife? Tell him that. Something like that, Peter said with a polite tilt of the head. His eyes slid to Ned. You see, even in fury our king can be persuasive. Ned kept still. He had learned long ago that Peter Baelish wanted reactions, to pinch and prod the world until it hissed. If one denied him the hiss, he grew vexed like a child with a toy that would not squeak. He looked instead at Barristan, who had returned without fanfare and now waited with two more of the Kingsguard at his back. Not Meryn or Boros, but Ares Oakhart and Preston Greenfield, each as blank and proper as an oath could grind a man to be. We do this now, Robert said for the last time. Varys, slip to wherever you slip and keep me abreast of her movements. Peter, go by the other way and drop 1,000 dragons on Slint's table along with a few threats. He flashed that old wolfish grin then, the one that made men want to cheer and break something. Tell him there's more if the streets stay quiet and none if I smell his men anywhere near Lannister spears. Renly, take Mandon Moore and demand the queen. If she is not in her rooms, tear them apart. Ares. He pointed at the younger knight, the one with the soft beard and earnest eyes. Take Boros Blunt, get the little one. Tommen, do it gently. Tell the Septa I wish him brought to my presence. Preston Meryn. He made a face as if he had tasted something rank. Keep them out of trouble. Barristan, take my hammer if need be and stand where I stand.
Ned.
I am here, Ned said once more. They broke like a tide. Even the air felt to Ned as if it had found a direction in which to flow. He stood with Robert in the corridor a moment, breathing heat and the smell of torch pitch, And the king set his jaw and lifted his shoulders as if remembering how to carry a weight and liking the way his back felt under it. "If there's blood," Robert said, "it will be my blood if it needs to be, not theirs." Ned did not answer. He did not believe the gods counted such promises. He walked with Robert down the corridor, the king's guard flanking them like white pillars that moved when the king moved. Hallis and Tomard followed close, and behind them a drift of men whose names Ned did not know but whose faces he would likely remember if they died. A chamberlain scurried before them like a rat showing a larger rat the way to a crumb. More than once they passed Lannister guardsmen, crimson cloaks dimmed by the torchlight into dark, the lion badges winking, hands falling to sword hilts as they saw who came and then falling away again. These men were Raggi Red Keep men, not Tywin Lannister's field knights, and they had habits of obedience shaped by a dozen paymasters. Confusion had the better of loyalty in them. That was to their advantage for this 1 hour. When they reached the Queen's apartments, Renly and Ser Mandon were already at the door. Renly's hair was damp, and he had a look on his face like a hawk that had found a rabbit hole. Ser Mandon's face, as ever, looked as if it had been carved from pork fat and left to set. Two of the Queen's household knights stood with long faces and reluctant smiles, the way a man smiles at a lord who may shortly be his lord no longer. The door itself was guarded by a Lannister retainer whose name Ned did not know. He looked at the king's face and had the sense to step away. Robert did not wait for a herald. He banged on the panel with the heel of his hand so that it echoed up and down the gallery. "Cersei," he called, voice low and dangerous. "Open to your king." It took long enough to raise sweat on the back of Ned's neck for the latch to scrape. When the door swung inward, Cersei Lannister stood there with her hair unbound and falling over a robe the color of white wine. She had had time to put nothing on her face and needed nothing. Her eyes were clear and pale in the candlelight, and she looked at Robert as one might look at the river when it has flooded its banks and come into one's house. Not surprised so much as put out. "My king," she said. Robert did not make the mistake of beginning with accusation. He had learned one thing in the last hour, and he used it. "You will come with me," he said. "You and the children. You are under guard." She did not reach for her throat or widen her eyes. She did not look behind her at the room where her bed would be. She smiled instead, and not as a woman smiles to soften a man or charm a crowd. It was a small thing, the smile a cat gives when it has heard the mouse knock on its own door by mistake. "Under guard," she repeated. "By whom? Your brother? He is not here. By your dogs from the north." Her eyes flicked to Ned then, quick and bright. "My condolences on your leg." "By me?" Robert said, and his voice did not rise. "Stand aside." For a heartbeat she did not move, and the air seemed to thicken into something one could chew. Then she stepped back with a slight inclination, and Renly breathed again, and Ser Mandon moved like a carving come to life. "Wake the children," Cersei said without turning her head, and women darted out from behind a hanging, their steps quick and lightless like mice in a pantry. Cersei turned then and looked full at Ned, letting her eyes travel slowly across his face as if choosing a place to insert a needle. "You have become very brave in our southern heat, Lord Stark," she said. "Winter makes men cautious. The stew pot has made you rash." Ned was not moved by her needle. He had known other women with sharp tongues. He had buried one with a tenderness that still pained him, and he thought then of Catelyn and of her red hair turned dark in his memory when the room grew close. He did not answer Cersei. She was not his to answer. He watched instead as Aerys Oakheart, who had as yet no blood on his white, put a gentle hand on Tommen's round shoulder when the boy appeared in the doorway of the inner chamber in his nightshirt, hair sticking up at odd angles. The child blinked up at the knight with the guileless gravity only very young children possess. "Your Grace," Aerys said to Robert, "if you will allow." "Bring him," Robert said softer, and Tommen's small hand closed around Aerys's finger and he came without crying. Myrcella came next, holding the Septa's hand so tight her knuckles were white. She looked like a sunrise, pretty and remote. When she saw the king, she bit her lip in what might have been fear and might have been a practice taught to her in some mirror. Ned thought of his own girls then with a suddenness that made him sway. Sansa would have reached for the queen's hand. Arya would have darted behind a chair and come out again with her arms set. He found a breath and let it out. Joffrey did not come until the noise in the inner chamber had risen and fallen and risen again. He strode, too tall for his age, in a robe that had been thrown on over his bare chest, his hair a pale, fine crown in the candlelight. His mouth had already shaped itself around a protest. It fell into an unbelieving O when he saw the hammer on Barristan's shoulder and the thin shine of Robert's fury beside it. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking like cheap wood. "This?" Robert said, and lifted his hand as if to brush away a fly. "You are under guard. The Queen is under guard. You will come." Joffrey flushed. "I will not," he said. "I am the—" He swallowed what he had been about to claim, but the shape of it hung in the air like a smell. Cersei did not come to him. She did not need to. "My son," she said mildly, "do as the king commands." Shock widened his eyes. He looked at her for rescue and then back at Robert and saw none from either. The confusion and the rage that followed were ugly. A child's confusion and rage grafted onto a boy who had been taught he could seize what he wanted and then apologize later for nothing. He half-stepped, then set his chin, then half-stepped again. Ser Mandon did not move at all. He had the stillness of a thing without thought. It was, Ned decided once again, remarkable how the Kingsguard could be so present and so absent in the same moment. They went out together, a procession that must have looked to Knight's eyes like a wedding going in reverse. Cersei walked between Renly and Barristan with her head lifted, one hand light on the creamy fall of hair that she had not bothered to bind. Myrcella with the septa, Tommen with Aerys and Boros, Joffrey trailing like a sulky cat with Ser Mandon's presence a cold wall behind him. Robert did not look at Cersei as they went. He did not look at Joffrey. He looked at nothing but the way forward as if he could cleave it with his gaze and make it easy. They did not take them far. The Queen's chambers were within Maegor's holdfast, and so were two smaller suites that had belonged once to women Ned could not name and could not bring himself to care to name now. Renly sent servants to strip them as they went, and within minutes the rooms had been turned from nests to cages. Hangings taken down, mirrors removed, covers folded away to show the hard planks under mattresses. With a few brisk gestures, Renly put a Kingsguard at each door and 2 of the northern men at the foot of each addition. It was the work of a quarter of an hour. Ned watched Robert as much as he watched Renly, and he saw that running these narrow alleys of decision had sweated something out of the king, had left him raw and oddly light. When all 3 were penned, no other word for it, Robert stood with his hands braced on the frame of the last door and breathed. He turned his head to look within at Myrcella, who lay very straight with her hands still in the septas, eyes wide open in the candlelight, and his mouth softened for half a heartbeat, then hardened again. "Septa," he said, and his voice gentled for the sake of his own honor if for nothing else. "No harm is to come to the girl, or the boy. Do not frighten them more than they are." "Your Grace," the woman whispered. She looked as if she might fall to her knees then and there to give thanks that this big man could say those words. "All the harm will be to me," Robert added in a low voice for himself alone, and maybe for Ned, who heard it anyway. They went at last to the council chamber because it had to be done, because the thing had to be given a shape that could hold in daylight. News ran before them like the wake of a ship. They could feel it in the looks that men gave as they passed, the quick glance and the quicker mask, the way a conversation would stop breathing as they entered a corridor and then gasp again when they had gone. Pycelle came in with his chain of many metals, a glitter of dull lights, and his hair combed into as smooth a deceit as he knew how to make. He made bowing look like a series of small collapses and only righted himself by grasping the table. He stood as far from Varys as the room permitted and as near to Peter as Peter would allow. Peter smiled that knowing-toothed smile of his and said nothing, which was a thing in itself. Renly leaned at the window as if indifferent to everything that had happened because indifference was his shield. Barristan took his place behind Robert's chair and put down the hammer on the table before the king with a deliberation that lent dignity to a piece of war iron and a king who had come to prefer cups to weapons. Ned sat on Robert's right, where he had always sat since the day the king had placed the badge on his breast. Robert spoke without preamble. He had not rehearsed words, and it could be heard and seen and felt in the way they came from him. They stumped and stumbled. They had a force that knocked the polite things aside. "The queen is not my wife," he said, which made Pycelle's mouth open and Peter's eyebrows climb a fraction and Varys's hands flutter for a moment before they composed themselves. "She is Tywin Lannister's daughter by law and the Kingslayer's by—" He broke off his eloquence and found a cruder word but did not spend it. "The children are not mine. I have put them under guard. I have put her under guard. At dawn we will proclaim the truth to the court, and I will send for my brother on Dragonstone. Stannis is my heir." Even Renly's practiced mask cracked at that, just a sliver. "Your Grace," he said, and the words were careful as a man stepping across a stream on stones that might not hold. "You will provoke Lord Tywin to war." Robert's laugh had no humor and too much noise. "And if I did nothing? Would Tywin send me sweetmeats on a plate when he learned I had found out his daughter's games? He has been in a sulk since the Trident and I do not care. If he wants war, let him come take it out of my hands. Let him lay siege to my city and I'll feed him to the fish." "Your Grace," Pycelle bleated. "Forgive an old man, but there is the matter of the boy." He looked at the table, at the hammer, anywhere but at his king. If the boy has been proclaimed," he dried his lips, "we must consider the peace. We must consider what is true," Ned said, surprising himself with the sharpness of his voice. "And we must consider what is lawful." Pycelle lifted a quivering hand and tugged at one of the heavy links around his neck. "The law, yes. Your Grace, if there is doubt, perhaps we might wait. It is late. The morning light will make things clearer." "The morning light will show me what I already see," Robert said. "Stop your quavering, Maester. If you stood in front of Tywin, he would blow you over with his nose." "Sit." Pycelle sat without having stood, which was impressive in its way. Robert turned to Varys. "You are always full of advice that I do not want. Give me some." Varys spread his hands. "Your Grace, I serve the realm, as you do, as we all should. The realm hates uncertainty. It also hates blood in the streets. If your Grace will permit me a suggestion. Send the children to separate comfortable confinements. Let no one use them for a rallying point. Send the Queen to her father under guard with a very clear letter that says what you will and will not tolerate. Stannis will come, but he will come with law pinned to his breast like a brooch, and he will come slow. In the meantime, the gold cloaks must be kept sweet and the commons kept busy. There is nothing that occupies the commons like bread and games. The tourney." "No," Robert said. "No games. We have had enough games. I do not want them in my city drunk and stamping their feet while Tywin steals it out from under me." "Peter." "Your Grace." Peter inclined his head. "Coin for the bakers, then. Coin for the watch to walk the markets. Coin for the shipmasters to watch the river and the bay. And coin for ravens. You will write the letter to Stannis yourself, Ned." "I will," Ned said. "And I will put my name on it," Robert said, with that particular blend of pride and petulance that had been charming 15 years ago. "I will not have him thinking he owes the crown to you and not to me. Gods, I wish I had a head I could borrow for this." He rubbed his brow with the heel of his hand and then lifted it. "Dawn we proclaim. Before that I will see the boy, the elder." Renly's chair scraped. A little as he shifted, Varys's lashes lowered like curtains. Peter smiled as if he were about to watch a play he had seen before and enjoyed. Barristan's hand moved on the hilt of his sword. A small movement, a man stretching a horse's stiff leg. Ned tasted a bitter thing and did not spit it out. He nodded. "As you wish." Robert rose, and so they all rose with him. The room heaved on its own breath as they left it, and Ned felt again the way a rumor runs ahead and a truth follows, and the rumor laughs because it will arrive first to have its drink. The corridors were busier now. Words had begun. The stones themselves seemed to vibrate with whispers. They reached the door where Mandon Moore stood like a pole forgotten when the tent fell. He made a stiff movement that might have been a bow. Inside, Joffrey sat in a chair that had been dragged to the center of the chamber, arms crossed. He did not rise when the king entered. He did not speak. His face had learned to hold contempt and wore it now as if it had come with the day's clothes. Robert looked at him for a time that stretched strangely, long and short, elastic with all the years that had brought them to this one moment. He took a step nearer. "Stand," he said. Joffrey did not stand. "Why should I?" he said. "I did not kneel to you this morning, and I will not." He clipped the word as if it had bitten his tongue. There were 100 things Robert could have done then, and 100 of them would have ended in a quicker and a worse blood. He did none of those. He stepped forward, slowly, as if he were approaching a skittish horse. "Stand," he said again. And this time he put into the word the tone he had used on a field when men who had never wanted to die still found themselves stepping into the path of a blade because he had told them it would be better if they did. Joffrey stood, perhaps in spite of himself. Robert reached out. He did not strike. He put his big hand on the back of Joffrey's neck, not hard, the way a father will who means to set a boy straight without breaking him. The boy went rigid, recoiling with all his small stiff pride. Robert lifted a lock of the pale hair between 2 fingers and let it fall. His mouth twisted. "I had hair like this once," he said, which was not true, had never been true, and hearing it Ned felt something like pity and anger twist together. Joffrey's face flushed. "If you mean to shame me, you should learn to speak properly," he said. "You slobber like a—" Robert's hand fell. He stepped back. He did not strike. He nodded once, a sharp, ugly gesture. "Sit," he said flatly. Joffrey sat. Robert turned on his heel and went out without looking at Ned. Barristan followed in 3 measured paces, ghosting. In the corridor, the king stopped and set his hand on the wall and breathed as if he had been running. It took a long moment for him to look at Ned, and when he did his eyes had the look they had had across a winter night's campfire when they had been younger and had not known what they would become. "He's not mine," he said, and in this moment it was not a law but a wound. "He is not yours," Ned said because he could not lie, and because he did not know how to say mercy in any other words. They went to the last of the rooms then, where Tommen was already asleep again, round mouth parted, the Septa humming an old song from the Riverlands under her breath, and to the one where Myrcella lay awake and dry-eyed. And Robert stood at each doorway and looked as if trying to fix something with his gaze that could not be fixed. When all had been looked at, he turned back to the council chamber, to the wine he needed but did not want, to the chair he had made his over years and put his weight into until it had learned the shape of him and would regret no other occupant. The hours before dawn were a long ditch to climb. Varys slipped away and back with reports in his pale hands like washed fish. The queen had sent a woman out with a folded paper and Renly had taken it from her before she had traveled the length of the gallery. The queen had spoken to the old maester and the old maester had wept and left. 2 Lannister knights had been seen at the doors of the armory and then had gone another way. Peter had found Janos Slint still awake and counting something in his head and had counted with him and had left. Him counting still. Renly paced and then forced himself to lounge again. Pycelle nodded off and woke with a start and declared some platitude to prove he had not slept. Barristan stood, which was what he knew how to do when the world went mad. Ned wrote. He wrote in the plain hand his father had learned him, the words for Stannis as short as he could make them and no more. He thought, as he wrote, of Cat and the road she had taken with Tyrion Lannister in tow, of letters crisscrossing the skies, of a boy on a crag above sea the color of bottle glass with a bird on his wrist and a hawk waiting, of Bran's small hands gripping the saddle, of Robb's first beard coming in sandy and uneven, of Arya's tangle of hair that no washing tamed, of Sansa's neat stitches and the careful places she had for every ribbon, of Rickon's fists. He wrote what he had to write, and at the end he put the king's name in a space left for it and stood back and looked and had no sense of having moved the world at all. Then he folded the parchment and dripped wax on it and gave it to Varys, who took it with a regretful expression a man reserves for sharp objects. "Dawn," Robert said shortly when the windows began to pale. "Let us show them that daylight is the same as night." The hall was already thronging when they entered. The word had outpaced the sun by an hour, and nobles had gathered as nobles always will when the scent of change is thick, in their nightclothes under their robes, with their hair tucked back any old way under their caps, with their eyes bright and greedy, afraid and hungry. Servants had torches, then see, and less, then simply armfuls of the morning as it came, laying pale bars across the pillars. The Iron Throne sat like a thing that would cut any man who came too near. Robert had never liked to climb it. He went instead to stand before it on the step below and let his size lend him height. He did not make a speech because he could not. He had never had patience for words in rows. He said what had to be said in a voice that carried, and the words went through the room like sword points. He did not look at Cersei, who was not there. She had not been brought, and that was wise. He did not look at Joffrey, who was kept where he was. He did not look at any one face for long. He looked at all of them and dared any to speak before he had finished. When he was done, there was a sound that was not a sound, the intake of 100 held breaths allowed out at once. A man in Lannister crimson, Kevin, Ned thought, steadier than his brother by all accounts and mercifully predictable, stepped forward to say something about unseemly haste and proof, and Robert cut him with, "The law is not haste." And that was that. Varys leaned a hair forward. Peter tilted his head. Renly's mouth had a line in it that might one day become a smile again. Pycelle toyed with one link of his chain and looked as if someone had given him a basket of eggs with which to do some remarkable trick and then left the room. Barristan looked at no one and everyone at once. When the clamor of murmur had reached a pitch and began, uncertain, to break into scattered sound, Ser Aerys came quickly to Barristan and spoke low. Barristan's hand went to the hilt of his sword in a motion so practiced it was prayer, and then fell away again. He looked up and his eyes went briefly to Ned's. Ned stepped to him without asking what was needed and received in a brief phrase the news that Cersei Lannister's women had none of them any hair on their heads any longer, for they had pulled it all out in the last hour trying to calm their lady, and that the lady herself had sent a letter to her father before dawn through a boy in the kitchens, and that the boy had been caught by one of Renly's men before he got past the inner gate, and that the letter was currently in Renly's hand. Renly lifted it now and offered it to the king with a little bow, and Robert took it as if it were a fish someone had handed him as a joke, and handed it without opening it to Peter. Peter read it as if he were tasting a new wine. "She calls you my lord husband," he reported. "She asks her father to come with haste and with his banners, as a concerned parent might. She accuses Lord Stark of seducing her handmaidens away from their proper duties for his northern god. She weeps upon the page. The ink is smudged where the tears fell. Throw it on the brazier," Robert said, and Peter did, and the little snake of smoke that ran up the chimney looked grateful. "If Tywin means to march, he will march whether she cries on paper or not." He lifted his hands then, as if opening them to the hall, and it seemed for a second almost formal. "Go," he said to the assembled lords and ladies. "Dress yourselves. Eat something if you can. There will be ravens. There will be orders. There will be peace if you care for it." They went in eddies and gusts, already speaking in knots, already reaching for hands they had not wept upon yesterday. Varys and Peter slipped away on their separate tides. Renly came to Ned with that bright look he wore when his mind was 3 streets ahead. "We need men at the gates," he said. "Lannister men will try to leave or to bring others in. The gold cloaks will need watching," he added, not as an explanation but as an acknowledgement that he had not forgotten the city watch's peculiarities. "Hallis will take men to the Mudgate," Ned said. "Tomard to the King's Gate. I'll not put my men in the streets beyond the gates. That's the watch's affair. And Peter has spoken to Slint." "Peter has spoken to Slint?" Renly repeated, and his smile went sideways. "Yes, that is precisely what worries me." Ned felt the stone under his feet shift, just a finger's breadth. He had trusted Peter once, in another life that had ended with a knife at his throat and a kiss, and in this life he knew better. "I will speak to the watch as well," he said, "with the king's leave." "Take the king's leave," Renly said dryly, "and then take the watch's respect. They will be polite to my green doublet, but their eyes will follow your direwolf more readily than my little stag's." When Ned turned to ask Robert's leave, the king was gone. He had the oddest feeling then, as if the wind had pulled the tent rope and the whole cloth of the moment had loosened, that an opening had been created without his consent. He found Robert in the Godswood, which was a southern garden pretending to be something older. The pool reflected a dull gray sky where dawn had not yet fully woken to blue, and the leaves of the oaks had an edge of black. Robert stood with his hands on his hips and his head bent as if listening for a heartbeat under the stones. He did not turn when Ned came. "When we were boys," Robert said, "I swore 100 oaths in one breath because if I ran out of breath I knew I would fall in love with some other oath. I have kept none of them as I should. Not to Lyanna, not to you, not to my men in the Reach who died while I slept with a whore. And now this." He lifted his head and looked at the pool and not at Ned. "Do you think the gods care for such talk? In this prissy little garden? This is not the place for our gods," Ned said. He stepped to stand beside Robert and looked at their twin reflections in the water, old friends grown thick and thin in opposite manners. Two men with too much memory between them. "The gods who hear me are roots and cold and a wind that smells of snow. They are not here." "Good," Robert said. "Then they will not hear me say that I want to kill someone. I do not much care. Ehu." He opened his hand and closed it again. "I will not harm the little ones. You heard me say it and I meant it. But you must stand between me and the boy. If he puts his hand on a knife, if he looks at me the way I think he might look at me when he learns that he is not." He stopped and breathed, and the breath was loud in the stillness. "Stand between us," he said, "or I will forget myself." Ned looked at the water and saw, in it, a boy of his own with a sword in the hall at Winterfell, showing off to the serving girls, grinning over his teeth at life. He nodded. "I will stand." Robert nodded back, slow, as if the motion had weight in it too. "Go do as you need. The city is not going to hold itself together because I have spoken a few ugly truths." Ned found Janos Slint in the armory yard with a small cloud of officers buzzing around him like flies around fat. Slint was fat in a more compact way than some, like a sack stuffed hard with grain. And he had that air some men get when they have found themselves uncommonly lucky and mean to make a profession of it. He smiled at Ned as if they had eaten salt together, and he murmured something oily about the honor of the hand's presence. Ned cut all that away with his eyes. "The city is tense," he said. "The king has given orders. The watch will keep the peace." "The watch always keeps the peace," Slint said. His eyes were little wet stones set in puff. "We are the peace. You will be commanded by the king's will and by mine as his hand," Ned said. "Your men will not take coin from anyone to change their loyalties." Janos's eyes glistened. "Lord Stark," he said in a voice he had likely practiced in front of a mirror, "the watch does not sell itself. We rent ourselves respectably to the crown. We are not a brothel." "Good," Ned said. "In that case you will be happy to hear that the crown intends to pay you handsomely to do what the crown says. Walk the walls. Keep your men out of the keep unless summoned. The queen is under guard. If any of your men aid any of the Lannister retainers in leaving the city, I will have them hanged. If any of your officers do, I will have them beheaded." Janos had the wisdom not to bristle under the Northman's tone. He had watched too many men bristle in the wrong moment and had learned the lesson they had died for. He put his hand over his heart as if he had won. "As the hand commands," he said, "we are all most deplorably sorry for this unseemly matter with her grace." Ned did not answer that. He had no wish to hear what Janos Slint deplored. He left the yard with Hallis and Tomard and the others falling in around him like pieces of a puzzle that fit whether they liked one another or not. The sun pushed a little more color into the sky and made the red stone of the keep blush as if with shame at being red when the world around it had other ideas. By the time they reached the Tower of the Hand again, he had in his head half a dozen more tasks, and he had to force himself, like a man hauling down a sail in a squall, to stop, to go up the stairs, to open a door and go to his daughters. The door opened on Sansa and Arya frozen in a wary truce across the small table where a platter of bread and cheese had been set down and not touched. Septa Mordane stood between them with a look that suggested she had been attempting to construct a bridge from size and had watched her construction collapse twice already that morning. Sansa's hair lay perfect, braided as if thinking itself a queen's hair would make the world consent to the title. Arya's hair went where it would and her face had a smudge under one eye she had failed to see. They turned their eyes together to him and the balance of the room changed as it always did when a father entered a room where children had been trying to live without him. "You will leave the city," he said, without preface. He had no room in his mouth for prefaces. "You will go by the river with a good escort and you will go quietly. I will send orders to ready the men." Sansa's mouth opened and the shape of Joffrey's name formed there, though she did not say it. And then she said it. She said it like a prayer. But the prince. Not now, Ned said, and his voice was low enough that Sansa's first tears surprised her. She put her hand to her mouth as if to keep them in. You will not speak of the prince. Arya did not cry. She had practiced not crying every day since they had left Winterfell, so that she would not give Sansa the pleasure of seeing it. Is it because of the queen? She asked, blunt, seeing more now than her sister because she had never learned to pretend to herself that the world would be as she wished if she wished hard enough. It is because of many things, Ned said. He sat and the leg cried out, but he ignored it. There may be trouble here. The north is far and Sansa's lessons will travel as well there as here. Sansa flinched as if slapped and then lifted her chin as if to practice for a day when a lady might be required to pretend she had not been struck. I do not understand, she said tightly. No one tells me. Arya burst in. Good, she said. He will tell me twice and I will tell you once, and then you can tell the Septa and then the whole city will know. Septa Mordain said, Arya, in the tone that suggested she had said it a dozen times already today. Ned put a hand out and Arya stopped as if her body trusted the hand even if her mouth did not trust any warning. He looked at Sansa's face and saw not the queen she imagined but a girl whose heart had rounded itself around a fragile golden thing that had never been hers. He would have to break it to save her. He had not done this well. He did not know a better way. He said, more softly, you will go home. I will follow when I can. It will not be long. That was a lie he did not know he had told until it was leaving his mouth. He saw Catelyn's face then as it would look when she read his letter, and he saw Rob's, and he saw a field he did not want to see, and he set his jaw. Arya, he said, you will put your clothes in your chest now. Bring only what you can carry. Sansa, do the same. There will not be time for all the chest of dresses. Choose, and do not argue with the Septa. Sansa had her arguments ready, all lined up, well-dressed arguments with clean hair, but they tripped over the look in her father's eyes and tumbled. She nodded once, stiffly, and went to her chest. Arya darted for hers like a small animal finding a hole, and Septa Mordain drew breath and then let it out without speaking. Ned stood with a steadying hand on the table. He wanted to say something to them, something that would make this one morning at least less cruel in their memory later. He did not find the words. He found only the old words that had been good enough for the North but not for this. Be quick, he said. It must be now. When he left them to their packing, his leg wanted to give. He leaned on the stick harder than pride liked and made himself an arrangement with his pain. In the corridor he found Syrio Farrell, as light as a dancer and twice as grave, leaning against the wall as if he had grown there for exactly this. Little cat, Syrio asked, and his golden brown eyes went to the place where Arya was not. Pack your own small bundle, Ned said. You will go too. Syrio smiled, a flash of white and kindness. It will be done, he said. He took 2 steps, then turned back. Your Grace, he added, which was not his mistake and could be forgiven. If the girl is to go, she must have Needle with her. She will have it, Ned said, unsmiling. The sun was fully up by the time he returned to the hall. The city beneath the Red Keep's high places had trebled its noise, every market stall opening and every gossip shouting as if noise could push back change. There were banners already, too. Ned saw through a window in the corridor. The stags along the walls had not multiplied, but in the streets below pockets of Lannister men gathered and looked up at the keep with their faces turned gold where the light hit. Janos had men on the walls now, standing with halberds and hooks, something like purpose on their faces. Peter's coin had found purchase, for an hour at least. In the throne room, Varys stood with a small white tube in his fingers. He lifted it at Ned with delicacy. From Dragonstone, he said, there are fast ships on that island, and men who can row in the dark. Lord Stannis replies that he will come. He folded the words a little to make them fit in this moment. He says he will come with all lawful speed. Peter sked as if he had heard a child recite a prayer incorrectly. Lawful speed, he said, by which he means he will arrive in time to claim credit and leave others to scrub away the stains. Renly made a sound that might have been a laugh. Sounded tired. "If he hurries," he said, "he may arrive in time to tell us we should have hurried." Barristan had stationed Ares Oakhart and Preston Greenfield at the Queen's doors and had taken Meryn Trant down to the yard to exercise him, which meant to make certain the man did not grow rust standing still. Boros Blunt had the look on his face of a man whose wine had soured in his mouth and did not know why. Ned took these small details in and stowed them the way a hunter marks the trees around him without thinking. He found Robert at a window again, looking out over the city as if it had offended him. He stepped to his side, and they stood a moment without speaking. "It will be war," Robert said at last, and the way he said it was like a man saying it will be rain when he has felt the change in the air for an hour and thus cannot be surprised by the first drop. "Perhaps," Ned said. "Not yet." Robert's mouth turned. "Tywin Lannister does not forgive," he said. "He tallies. He lays the coins out and counts them, and then he puts the pile in his pocket and takes the other man's cloak to wrap around his purse. He will march. So will men of the Riverlands and the Vale," Ned said, though he did not say whose heels would click more eagerly at the sound of the march. "So will the North if called, but I hope not. If we can make the law stand, perhaps men will tire of crisis." "Law?" Robert repeated, and again it was an old friend's name in his mouth. "Do you remember, Ned, when law was a thing we thought of as someone else's concern? When we thought of bread and of beer and of taking a hill? Gods, I liked that man better than this one. He was less clever. The clever ones are all down in the dungeons," Peter said behind them in his light, bright voice. Robert did not turn. He lifted one hand and made a small, obscene gesture that would have earned a boy a cuff. Peter laughed and withdrew a step. Ned looked at the arm of the king and at the hand that had been so steady around a hammer and so unsteady around a cup, and he felt something between fear and hope settle in his chest like a bird too tired to fly. Put its head under its wing and sat there, breathing. There were 100 ways for the day to break open then, for someone in a red cloak to panic and strike, for someone in a white cloak to flinch, for Janos Slint to find a stack of gold coins heavier than his oath and to discover that coin had weight beyond the scales. For a few long hours, none of those happened. The queen stayed in her rooms like a lady in a story whose tower was too high for any ladder. The children stayed quiet as if the walls themselves had muffled them. The city hissed and whispered and gossiped, but it did not yet throw stones. Varys's little birds came and went with news that tasted like copper. Peter moved coin from one pouch to another with a deftness that made contradictions look like compliments. Renly spoke to knights as if he were ordering someone else's shirts and made half of them commit to stand with the king if there were shouting and many of them commit to stand with the king if there were ale in it. Toward noon, a procession of Lannister men arrived at the outer gate with their helms tucked under their arms and their swords bound in ribbons like offerings to a shrine. They asked in loud voices for entry to see their queen, and Janos's men on the wall looked down at them with the confidence of men who had been paid twice in a day. The procession turned away at last, a ripple of red moving back through the streets, and Ned thought of a snake winding itself around a city's ankle. He went to see the children. Myrcella curtsied when he came, a little thing of habit and politeness, and her septa watched Ned as if she had been told to distrust his northern gods and did so but was grateful to anyone of any god who remembered a child. Tommen was playing a game with Knucklebones that he had likely learned of the stable boys, counting with his tongue between his teeth. Joffrey stood when Ned entered, and he looked as if he had spent the hours climbing up and down inside his rage like a boy on a ladder. He said nothing. Ned stood a while in silence as one does in rooms where the wrongness cannot be named. He left them and went to Cersei at last. Renly met him at the door with a bright-eyed expression that meant he had pried something loose. "She asked me for wine," he said. "I gave her water." He lifted his brows. "Do you want to go in alone? Or shall I take pleasure in watching?" "Take your pleasure elsewhere," Ned said, and Renly shrugged with elegant irritation and stepped away. Mandon Moore stood motionless as stone. Ned went in. Cersei stood at the window in a gown the color of undertones in sunlight. She had bound her hair. She turned her head slowly and looked at him over her shoulder, and her mouth tilted. "Lord Stark," she said, as if greeting an old acquaintance in a strange city. "You come to gloat. I come to speak," he said. "It will be in your interest if you listen." "My interest," she said, and moved the word in her mouth the way one moves a strange fruit to find the sweet part. "What interest does a woman have when her children are taken from her and her husband holds her like a thief? You do not understand what interest means." She turned fully then and came a pace toward him. Not near, not far. And she let her eyes take in his leg and his tiredness and the lines that years had put on his face and on hers. "But speak. It will be amusing to hear what the North calls mercy." "You are under guard," Ned said. He did not move to a chair. He did not invite her to sit. "You will remain under guard until the king decides otherwise. A letter has been sent to Lord Stannis. He will come. When he comes, the matter of succession will be set in order. You may send letters to your father and to your brother at Casterly Rock. They will be read." She laughed then, not loud, and it might have been real laughter if the moment had been another. "You have grown very bold, Lord Stark," she said. "You always had such a solemn mouth. It suited snow. It does not suit the taste of sun." She tilted her head. "You think you have one. You think because you have put me in a room with guards at the door that you have put me in a box through which no whispers can pass. But boxes have cracks, and whispers like cracks. You have friends now. You think that means you have allies. Wait until the wind blows the other way and see who still holds your hand." "I have held the hands of men in the cold," Ned said, and his voice was as flat as a frozen river. "I do not drop them because the wind changes." She took that in and put it aside. "You tell yourself a story about being a good man," she said. "It is a sweet story. You do not drink, you do not wench. You keep the old gods in your heart like an old song. You think the story will save you, but the story cannot hold a blade. It cannot catch a raven. It cannot make men fear you. You will be eaten by those who have no stories, only hunger." Ned felt something old rise in him then, as if called by name. The sense of standing in a forest while snow falls and having the patience to wait for the deer to step within the arc of your bow. "You made your own story," he said. "You made a bed with your brother and you put children in it. Now you will sleep there." "Law," she said scornfully. "I have listened to old men say that word until I could vomit it. What is law? A piece of paper with ink. A man with a white cloak. A king who stands and speaks. It is not a sword. It is not a castle. It is not 3,000 men on horseback with banners that fill the sky. I have those." Her eyes glittered and then flattened. "You think you are safe because you have taken my little lambs into pens. Do you think I cannot break the pen? I have broken stronger things than your northern fences. You will see." He had not meant to speak kinder words, and he did not know whether they would be heard as such. He said them anyway because he had daughters in this city as well. "If you love them, do not break it," he said. "Do not call your father with steel. Let the law stand. The girl can be wed to a king in truth. The younger boy can have a lordship to make him fat and happy. Joffrey..." He did not finish that thought. He thought of his promise to Robert and let the end of the sentence go into silence. Cersei's face changed then, subtly, a little like the way a cat's face changes when a bird flutters too near. "You will not kill him," she said. "Your king has the taste. But you know." She smiled again, and this time it was small and true, and it frightened Ned more than her scorn had. "You will take the knife from his hand. You will cut your own fingers to do it. And then you will bleed and say, 'See how honorable I am.'" He did not realize until later that she had come close. In the moment he said only, "Do not call your father." She lifted her shoulders once and let them fall. "I will call him, and if he does not come, I will find another father." She turned her back on him then as if he had become a window and she had decided not to look out of it. He left her because there was nothing more to say that would stick to anything inside that room. The day unrolled. The ravens went. The watch walked. The queen sat. The children lay. The king stood and then sat, and then sent for drink he did not drink, and then sent the drink away. The small council made itself useful in the ways it could. Renly took letters to houses in the Reach with his seal and his grin. Varys disappeared into the tunnels and alleyways with his silk sawls. Peter touched 100 things with his light fingers and dirted none of them, so that no one could say how they had come to be moved. Ned sent men to the mud gate and to the king's gate with quiet words. Hallis Malin did not like the south, but he liked orders. He went with the sense steward brings to blood. Tomard laughed at a Lannister squire in the street, and the boy's face turned the color of his cloak. Near evening, a boy with yellow hair and a nose too quick for his face darted under Barristan's arm and thrust a paper at Robert with a flourish, and then looked at Ned, perhaps thinking himself clever, and maybe he was. Robert unfolded it and read words that made his lips go pale. He thrust the paper at Ned and stalked a pace away. The note was brief. Lord Tywin Lannister regretted the king's distress. Lord Tywin Lannister would come to the king's aid with all speed and all proper honor. Lord Tywin Lannister rejoiced that Lord Stannis Baratheon had been called to offer the clarity of the law. Lord Tywin Lannister expressed his concern for his daughter and grandchildren and trusted to the king's mercy and his hand's wisdom for their safekeeping. It is a threat dressed like a feast, Robert growled from the window where he had gone to stare at nothing. He will come here with banners, and my gates will be open, and the gold cloaks will smile their little smiles, and my people will cheer, and I will embrace him and call him father. And when he is done, the city will belong to him. We will not open the gates, Ned said. Not until Stannis stands in this room. Not until the law is clear. Robert ran a hand through his hair and made a noise low in his throat. Not assent, not denial. I should never have stopped riding, he said. You would have died on a spear 10 years ago if you had not, Ned answered in the same low tone. And I would not have liked anyone else on this chair any more than I like you. A kind of peace ran under Robert's mouth then, and he snorted, and for a moment the old friendship stepped between them and put its arms around both. You old ice, Robert said without warmth and with it. You would put my bones to bed and then tidy the bed curtains and tell Cat you had done a good day's work. I would, Ned said. Night came again before anything large changed. The Queen's women slept and woke and slept in their chairs with their heads on their folded arms and their hair stuck to their cheeks. Myrcella slept with her hand in the septas. Tommen snored like a pup. Joffrey lay staring at the ceiling as if numbers moved there and he meant to catch one and put it in a box. Robert dozed an hour with his head back and his mouth open, and then woke with a jerk and frowned at the room like a man who recognizes a house but not the furniture. The city drank itself to either silence or riot, and Ned could not tell which from the sound. Varys returned to murmur in the king's ear that a messenger had left the rock at a gallop. Peter smiled and murmured something in Janos Slint's ear that made Slint laugh and rub his hands together like a man cold who sees a fire. Renly sent a page to Loras Tyrell with a folded note and received back a lily and 3 words, and his smile when he read them had tenderness in it. Barristan made the round of the white cloaks and spoke to each in turn with a voice like wool and oaths like a knife. Ned dreamed briefly of snow falling in the courtyard at Winterfell and the sound of each flake hitting stone, a sound no one else had ever believed in. He woke to a man at the door saying, Lord Stark. And from the tone he knew it was the hour when the choice one has been avoiding walks up and puts its hand on your chest to feel your heart. He rose and found his cane and went to where Robert was already standing with his back to him. And for a moment he was overwhelmed by how tired of being men they both were. They will come, Robert said, not turning. They will, Ned said. And when they do, I will not let the city be their ring. No, Ned said, you will not. And he put his hand on the table next to the hammer, palm flat upon the wood, and he felt under his hand the grain running the other way. The grain did not care. The wood did not care. The morning wood, and the day after. He stood with his hand upon the table as if that could do anything for anyone and listened to his old friend breathe. And outside the red keep the gulls cried and the river ran and the city, like any living thing, gathered itself to see what would be asked of it and whether it was willing to pay. He thought of the truth as a cold line in a book, as a boy in a forge with a helm too big for him and a smile that did not know the world. Of a girl at a river's edge with a baby against her shoulder. Of a woman in a room turning the law into a thing to be scoffed at. Of a man at a window who had once been a god on a field. He thought of a crown that cut and a throne that bit back and a house in the north where the wind was a friend even when it flayed your face red. He thought, carefully, of nothing at all. In the hall below, he could hear the first footfalls of men gathering for another day of wearing their faces and twitching their hands as if the movements mattered. He took his hand from the wood and stood straight. He put his weight on the leg that hurt and felt the pain rise in Latin and sit there like a loyal dog. He turned. The door stood open. There were no banners. There were no trumpets. There was a corridor and the sound of leather and steel and something too faint to name that still meant change. He stepped into it and did not look back.